welcome back. It now seems Ukraine will be given permission to access the blast site where a missile killed 2 people in Poland. This is according to the Polish president's top foreign policy advisor. Ukraine's asked for access to the scene. President Volodymyr Zelensky has denied that Ukraine fired the missile. The US President Joe Biden's cast doubt on this. The Polish President, Andrzej Duda, says access to the site of the explosion would require the agreement of both the countries leading the investigation, that's Poland and the US.
Andrzej Duda nie widzi przeszkód uczestnictwa obserwatorów ukraińskich, natomiast to wymaga
Ukraińcy będą obserwatorami, natomiast to Polacy będą
wymiaru sprawiedliwości i zgodności z procedurami sojuszniczymi i stanowiska naszych sojuszników.
Meanwhile, depending on how you read the international situation, it seems that Poland and some NATO countries are trying to downplay all of this. The importance of this is that Poland is a member of NATO. If it's proven that a Russian missile landed and was seen to be attacking a member of NATO, that would mean that other NATO countries, including the US, could be forced to come to defend Poland, which would lead to a direct conflict between the US and Russia. That's the nightmare scenario. That's not where we are right now. Professor Esterhuyse is an associate professor of strategy at the Faculty of Military Science at the University of Stellenbosch. Professor, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. So we have Ukraine saying this is not their missile. We have President Biden appearing to dispute what Ukraine is saying. How do you read what's going on here, and what must be quite a difficult situation?
Well, it's a difficult situation, but in a way, it doesn't really matter where the missile is coming from. We need to understand that there's a number of campaigns unfolding in the war in Ukraine at the moment. One of those campaigns is a missile offensive from the Russian side. And of course, the Ukraine is using a number of ways to defend themselves, and they're using air defense missiles themselves. So whether this missile is coming from Russia or whether this missile is coming from the Ukraine eventually is actually irrelevant, because it is part of Russia's aggressive campaign against the Ukraine. And that's the important point that we need to understand here. If it wasn't for the invasion of Russia, there would not have been a missile landing in Poland at the moment. And that's the bigger picture I think we need to understand here.
I would imagine that countries like Poland and the US and Russia, I think, all have a big interest in preventing any kind of escalation. They probably would think, let's try and calm this down. But I don't think that's Ukraine's interest. This entire war between Russia and Ukraine, which is also really between Russia and Western weapons, is being fought in Ukraine. It's Ukrainian people who believe they've been attacked, who have been attacked. Does that mean Ukraine would want to escalate this as well, or not really?
I don't think so. I think what we are witnessing at the moment is a typical proxy war. And so I don't think there's any attempt from the Western side or even from Zelensky himself to escalate, to broaden the war, so to speak. I think Zelensky and Ukraine, they're probably going to exploit the situation to ensure Western support, to ensure that, Western support and Western weaponry in particular don't dry up. And so I don't think this is going to lead to any escalation of the war, but it may lead to another round of support for Ukraine and another round of equipment coming from the West for this proxy war.
The obvious risk is that it could happen again, that a Russian missile or a missile that looks like a Russian missile or a Ukrainian missile that was possibly made in Russia during the Soviet era, or any combination of all of these things, could land in Polish territory again. Poland's a democracy. It will have people who will be very angry at that. They will probably demand that their government respond. I mean, is what we're seeing now, I hate to say it, just a sort of dress rehearsal in some way? This is the kind of thing that could easily happen again.
Well, I think there's two very important factors to consider here. The one is that, there's no guarantee that this is not going to happen. I mentioned the missile offensive from Russia's side. We know that the Ukraine is they're talking about an 93% success rate in shooting down the missiles coming from Russia. So it's a high percentage. So the sky above Ukraine at the moment is filled with missiles from Russia and from Ukraine. And I would say there's a good chance that it will happen again. Will this lead to, let's say, an Article 5, used by NATO and an excuse to bring Article 5 of the NATO treaty into play? I doubt. Third factor, perhaps, that one needs to consider here is the role of Poland. And Poland, they're waiting for a trigger incident in a way. They're sitting with a well-trained military. And, they're looking to settle a score or two with the Russians. I know there's a history between Poland and Russia. And I think Poland, in a way, is perhaps a problem for NATO at the moment, or may become a problem for NATO at the moment if another missile ends up in Poland. Because I know, the Polish, they're waiting for the Russians to overstep the line and to do things that will allow them to enter Russia.
In the end, does that mean the Americans are basically trying to stop Ukraine from escalating the war too much by giving them weapons and money? I mean, could the same thing happen with Poland? It would be the Americans who would have to try and find a way to prevent Poland from going too far. I mean, it's all getting very messy.
Well, I don't think it's just the Americans. I think it is NATO in particular, but of course America is an important part of NATO. But I think what we are seeing and witnessing at the moment is a very cautious approach by NATO. They do want to provide support to Ukraine, and I don't think that support will very soon, vanish. And there's strong indications that there will be continued support for Ukraine in future. But I think they're walking a very, very narrow line here. They don't want to broaden the war. They don't want to escalate the war, not geographically, and perhaps not even in terms of weapon systems. I'm thinking about, for example, the Russian use of nuclear weapons here. So I think there's a real effort from NATO's side to manage this war very carefully and not to let it get out of hand. Keep it geographically restricted to Ukraine, and also in terms of weapon systems to keep it under the nuclear threshold.
It seems that U.S. generals, and I don't know if this is just a propaganda offensive, but they keep trying to make the point that Russia's casualties are so high that this would be a good moment to start some kind of a negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. Russia angrily denies that. Is the U.S. just making this up, or are there strong grounds to believe that actually Russia really is beginning to run out of men and materiel?
Well, that's an interesting question, and we are also dependent on information sources from the different and the whole spectrum, I should say. So one need to speculate here as well. There's no doubt in my mind that Russia is taking a lot of casualties at the moment. We've seen that last week with their withdrawal from Kherson. But then at the same time, Russia is a big country. It's a country with a lot of resources. Russia have always, throughout history, shown a capacity to react at a strategic level and to come back into conflicts. I have no doubt that there's a lot of casualties, but I have also no doubt that Russia has depth and that they will be willing to come back and to continue with this war for some time to come. The question here, and I think this is the real debate, is when to start with the negotiation process, because we know that all wars, as in all wars, are political in nature, and all wars will eventually end with some form of a negotiated settlement. And I think that's the question at the moment, not so much who's losing how much people, manpower, and equipment. But when would be the right moment to begin with the process of negotiations? And that's the critical question here.
Professor Abel Esterhuyse, as always, thank you. Associate Professor of Strategy at the Faculty of Military Science at the University of Stellenbosch.